Couple of weeks, I've been finding out about a new law that's coming out regarding food safety. And I wanted to talk to you about it. And I think it's important that people understand it. We're all adults, but I think that it's important to know that forced fortification could be dangerous. Even though the UK government has still gone ahead with it, it's going to affect a lot of foods. So the UK government has mandated the fortification of non-wholemeal wheat flour with folic acid to reduce the incidence of neurotube defects in newborns. So this requirement, enacted through the Bread from Flour Amendment Regulations of 2024, applies to white and brown wheat flour, but explicitly exempts wholemeal flour and other grain flours like rye and spelt. The government has said that the mandatory addition must be fully implemented by the 13th of December 2026, but many millers have already begun fortification earlier in 2025. Flours must contain at least 0.25 milligrams or 250 micrograms of folic acid per 100 grams of flour. There are exemptions. Small-scale mills producing less than 500 tons of flour per year are exempt from requirement to avoid disproportionate operational burdens. The policy aims to prevent approximately 200 cases of serious neurotube defects. The primary risk of excessive folic acid intake is the masking of vitamin B12 deficiency. Whilst high folic acid levels can correct the anemia associated with B12 deficiency, they do not prevent the associated neurological damage, which can progress undetected and become irreversible. This is particularly a concern for older adults who are prone to B12 malabsorption. There's some conflicting evidence regarding cancer. Whilst folate is essential for DNA repair, excessive synthetic folic acid might promote the growth of pre-existing tumours, particularly in colorectum and prostate, though this risk is not definitely proven at fortification levels. Very high levels may interfere with the absorption of other nutrients such as zinc. So what studies were carried out for safety and what studies contradict it? The UK's government decision to mandate folic acid fortification relies primarily on modelling exercises and reviews by the Scientific Advisory Committee. These bodies concluded that preventing the NTDs outweigh the potential risks provided intake remains below 1 milligrams per day upper limit for adults. They concluded that evidence linking fortification level folic acid to adverse effects was insufficient or inconsistent. The Committee on Toxicity affirmed there was no definitive evidence on toxic effects from unmetabolized folic acid at concentrations expected from fortification. The UK heavily relied on safety data from countries with long-standing mandatory fortification, such as the USA and Canada. Now, despite the government's position, several researchers and reanalysis of existing data argue that the safety evidence is flawed or the risks have been underestimated. One particular lady, Dr. Claire Craig, an independent analysis, argued that previous safety data ignored critical dosage details. Reanalysis of randomized controlled trials suggests that whilst high doses and very low doses show no effect, the intermediate doses are associated with an 18 to 23% increase in cancer incidence, particularly prostate and colorectal cancer. Critics point out that many original safety trials were too short, approximately 5 years, to detect cancers that take decades to develop, or were conducted in populations already exposed to fortified foods like the US, which masks the difference between treatment and placebo groups. So what about masking B12 deficiency? Whilst acknowledged by the UK government, critics argue the scale of the risk is underestimated, particularly for the elderly. They contend that even if anemia is corrected, the underlying neurological damage from B12 deficiency may progress undetected in a larger number of people than modelled. Some studies suggest a link between very high maternal folic acid intake and adverse neurodevelopment outcomes in children, such as poor attention spans and working memory. Though this evidence remains conflicting, it is often confounded by supplement use rather than food fortification. I'm going to put up a summary of the conflict. Please pause and read at your own time. What about people with stents? For people with coronary stents, the primary concern regarding folic acid is not the low levels from fortified foods, but the potential risk of in-stent restenosis, re-narrowing of the artery associated with high-dose supplementation. A landmark study published in the New England Journal of Medicine found that patients who took high-dose folic acid supplements combined with vitamins B6 and B12 after receiving a coronary stent had a significant higher rate of restenosis. And the other worry was a greater need for repeat revascularization procedures compared to those on a placebo. So would combining other foods which are connected increase the risk? Combining multiple fortified foods can increase the folic acid intake, potentially pushing specific groups closer to or above the 1,000 milligrams or 1 milligram upper limit, particularly if supplements are also taken. Critics argue that the trials used by the SACN, typically 5 years, are too short to detect cancers that take decades to develop. The UK's reliance on modelling rather than post-implementation surveillance in other countries is seen as a weakness. Critics note that in the USA and Canada, where fortification existed since 1998, some studies observed a temporary increase in colorectal cancer rates shortly after fortification began, though this remains debated. UK experts like Dr. Claire Craig could not establish conventional safe upper intake level for children, yet the policy proceeds without specific safeguards for this vulnerable group who already exceeded limits due to fortified cereals. So in summary, the long-term studies primarily highlight an 18 to 23% increase in cancer risk at fortification level doses. This is a signal often missed in shorter trials of those conducted in already fortified populations. The Norwegian vitamin trial and the B-Proof trial reported significant increases in colorectal cancer and overall cancer mortality after extended follow-up periods of 5 to 7 years. Critics argue that the UK government relied on meta-analysis of short-term data averaging 5 years, which are insufficient to detect cancers with longer latency periods. Concerns also persist regarding unmetabolized folic acid and potentially suppressing immune function and accelerating neurological decline in the elderly. Ultimately, opponents contend that the policy exposes the entire population to potential carcinogens without definitive long-term safety proof for lifetime consumption.